Welcome to Pop Culture Shark, a live stream about all things pop culture. I'm Final Monkey.
And I'm Caleb.
And I'm Daniel.
Yep, today we have Daniel back with us, and this is a very special show, one that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. We are going to be talking about some of your favorite movies and TV shows and how they might be have a connection to the Bible. But first, let's do our weekend checkup. Caleb, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's been a busy weekend. We had I have this embarrassing story. We went to a trivia night for my mom's friend's daughter's former roommate, whatever. It was a trivia fundraiser for her softball team, and usually there's a and we do this every year because they always ask us, and usually there's a question that everyone comes in clutch in, and usually, at least with Cameron, my dad doesn't believe him, and he's always and then Cameron's always right, and he does this every year and he doesn't learn his lesson. Well, and there's always, for some reason, a Young and the Restless question that my mom gets because of Mama.
Yeah.
Well, this year, the question that I came in clutch in, because usually it's something like last year, it was a Kingdom Hearts question. I was super proud of that. But this year, the question that I came in clutch on, it was for pop culture, and it was the 50 Shades of Grey saga consists of 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades Darker, and what third book?
Like and 50 Shades of Freedom or Freed or something.
50 Shades Freed. So I waited because I knew the answer. and everyone else was like, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, I can't believe I know this. And then that's that's my story. That's my contribution to pop culture. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. So I was like, should I answer?
But yeah, other than that, we're still packing. We have a closing date, March 7th, and so we're gonna get the carpets cleaned after that, and then just kind of move things slowly in, and then like March 16th or 17th. Will be the day that we actually recruit friends to like actually move the furniture. So hopefully by this time next month, Cameron and I will. We're gonna say we own a house, even though it's in our Nana and Papa's name, but we're paying the mortgage. So
yeah,
they're helping us buy it. Awesome. But yeah, that's what I got going on.
So I had a similar story to what you just said. I was watching Jeopardy one night with my mom, and they're like, "What is the first X-rated cartoon?" And I'm like, "What is Fritz the Cat?" God. My mom is like, "How'd you know that?" And I'm like,
Jeez.
Actually, I have never seen it, but I just love animation facts. So I read about stuff, and but it's still, mom's just looking at me like, "How did you know that?"
Oh man, yeah, it's there's being knowledgeable in pop culture. Sometimes it can get embarrassing.
Yeah. As for me, it's been a busy week trying to just get a bunch of stuff done around the house so I can focus on other things. Pop culture wise, I finally watched Venture Brothers movie. Radiant is the Heart of the Baboon, I think is what it's called. It's some crazy name. It was a fun conclusion to the series. I still think you should watch that, Caleb.
Yeah,
you would love it.
I probably would, yeah, because it's like superhero parodies, right?
Well, it's a parody of Johnny Quest, but yeah, they do superhero parodies. Like in the final movie, the bad guy shoots off their building up into space. I'm like, oh, this is like Fantastic Four, and then they bring it up they're like, we can't stop this. They go, well, Reed Richards did a Fantastic Four issue, blah blah blah. And I'm like, oh, okay, they know exactly what they're doing.
Okay. So, we aren't really gonna talk about news. I do want to bring that up. How do you feel about Pedro Pascal? You brought up Reed.
If the cast is true, I guess I'm okay with it. I think Pedro's the only one that I'm iffy on still. But
I think he's just the only one who will say yes. I don't think anybody wants to play Reed.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to work with Marvel right now after the last few movies. And then they're like, oh, I'm gonna be tied into these movies for the next 5-10 years or whatever, and I can't do other movie roles and stuff. And I don't know what Disney pays. It's probably not as much as you think it is, unless you're Robert Downey Jr. So
Yeah.
How about you, Daniel? How's your week been?
It's been pretty good. I am definitely looking forward to the debut of, oh goodness, what's his name from Agent State Farm. There we go. That's going to be a fun commercial. I enjoy Super Bowl commercials myself, so
yeah.
I'm looking forward to. They did a spoiler tease with Agent State Farm, with the Terminator music. So I'm looking forward to that commercial.
Ooh,
hopefully, I mean, it's like I don't know, it'll be a minute something.
Yeah.
Shot. I don't know what they're going to do in that short span, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless, along with all the other commercials. So
I still think my favorite commercial is every commercial is a Tide commercial. If there's a clean shirt in the commercial, it's a Tide commercial.
It's a Tide commercial. What I loved so much, man, golly, that takes me back. The Old Spice guy riding the horse, and they even had him in there.
Yeah,
and, man, that just blew me away. And he's like, "Oh no, it's not. It's a Tide commercial because
right."
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I'm excited, and then probably getting Deadpool 3, which apparently it's not going to be called Deadpool 3. Apparently, it has a name. So
yeah,
the rumor I've heard is Deadpool and Friend. So I don't know if that's the title or not.
That would be really funny.
That would be really great. I'm hopeful, but man, I'll tell you, it gets a little bit tiresome because I think I've seen so many fan made, like, amalgamations of Wolverine and Deadpool hanging out together.
Yeah,
and it wasn't the real thing. That now I'm just like, just make it or don't. But like, I've been waiting forever for that. So
yeah, so I think that trailer is confirmed for the night. We're supposed to get some other movie trailers.
Okay.
Depending on how good it all is tonight, that might be next week's show. Us discussing the trailers. We might also get a Nintendo Direct this week, so we might just do a combination of the two.
Just like a whole news, like
our
weekend update.
Yeah. So that's the plan for next week. So why don't we go ahead and get into the show? I know there's some big football game or something tonight. I don't know.
Something going on.
Yeah, so I think we've all got places to be tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. I brought Daniel on tonight. Daniel, why don't you talk a little bit about your background, just a little bit, so people know where you're coming from, if you don't mind.
Sure. So recently, I graduated from Criswell College with my bachelor's in biblical studies. And part of what my degree plan included was a sort of a survey introduction to all things related to Bible in a technical, more academic sense. So we studied Hebrew and Greek. We looked at methods of interpretation, church history, and how things have changed over the last 2,000 years between major denominational differences. And some of it's really exciting to learn about. A lot of it can be boring, depending on what you care about schisms or whatever, between this group or that group. But a lot of really useful information. And the approach that Criswell takes, I would say, in relation to the rest of the world, the other sciences and disciplines, whether that's history, mathematics, political science, is tying those things together with scripture in a very immersive type experience. So you're kind of seeing how over time studying the Bible is related to those other topics and those other areas of the world, other areas of study. And one class in particular, one area was that there was a program that included a theology in film class where we talked about the way in which film and media and stories have theological themes in general, and some of those being biblical or some of those being, you know, secular theologies that might be more in line with some of the Eastern religions, or so certainly like Star Wars would be an example of that, like having kind of a Lucas drawing on some concepts that have somewhat of a foundation in Eastern understanding, with like yin and yang, right? The light and the dark side of the force being one. That's just like a real easy, low-hanging fruit example. But the purpose of the class, and again of the approach, is to ask the question, what do the films that have those themes, what are they communicating? How can we think differently about imagery and the really just the medium of storytelling in general in relation to what we look at when we're looking at scripture? Because there's a sense in which obviously scripture, the Bible, has different genres, but a large portion, a big chunk of it is narrative, right? Where you've got protagonists and antagonists, right? Rhetorical themes, devices, plot points, and all of that translates to pop culture, to movies, to video games, to, you know, all those things have a narrative of a sense, right? Playing a campaign in a game, there's a narrative there. So my backdrop is just kind of studying the Bible from that perspective, but also studying it in relation to things like pop culture and media and film. And I'm a big film fan to begin with. I've seen a decent number of films, and I enjoy having those conversations about whether it's the artist's original intent, right? The director's cut, what was the director trying to say or communicate, or the writers, or even the actors, right? Taking a nuanced perspective on maybe a famous character that they're portraying. I love all that. So
cool. And I think sometimes it's even an anti-religious message that is hidden in there. I remember,
yeah, sure, yeah, can be.
One night I asked you, what about Wizard of Oz? And we talked about it for a while.
Right.
You said, well, that's actually an anti-religious movie, that there is no God, there is no wizard. It's just a man behind the curtain at the end of it. So, sometimes I don't know if the writer of the movies is aware what they're doing, because some of this stuff is so ingrained into us through time and tropes and stuff. And then other times it's very obvious that they absolutely knew what they were doing.
Right. Well, at least in the case of Wizard of Oz, I can say it's definitely it's a questioning of sort of, so like in people's experiences with religion, especially with organized religion, there's an authoritative kind of presence, right? You go into a church and you've got the elders, or the priesthood, which is the authority in that space. And it's sort of early on, I would say, probably especially in the United States, whether you're talking about Catholicism or evangelicalism, there's kind of this like feel of like this mood that, well, you don't question the people in authority, right? Don't, and that lending itself to that, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, experience where they're there.
Yeah.
And so, and as you're looking at, and so just to kind of ducktail off this, since Aaron brought it up, the imagery within the story is very much likened to a more traditional church setting. So, right. So like, when Dorothy and her friends are walking down the hallway, you see pane glass windows, which are similar to churches. When they get into the main room, there's actually an organ sort of structure set up in the backdrop. A lot of churches in the old days had organs for their worship. There's what looks like an altar, or maybe even a pulpit could be interpreted at the front, where the projection of the head, right, comes out, and then fire coming up, which has symbolism that seems to relate to even Old Testament picture, right, with the fire on the altar. And it's all very scary. It's very intimidating. And there is that theme, or that aura, of, don't question me, I am Oz. That all those kind of somewhat, I guess, historically negative kind of ideas. Or yeah, so you see there the altar with the fire coming off, the organ in the background, and of course centerfold is the spirit being, right, the deity, the God, which is saying, this is, I'm telling you what to do, and the big head, right, the knowledge, right, I know everything, you don't know anything. And so all those things sort of wrapped up that kind of give a picture of perhaps in a more theatrical sense, what some people experience when they go to church, when they're what they think of in a negative context, and then come to find out at the end of the story that that's all fake. That's not even really happening. Those are, those are special effects being created by this guy running around in the background who wears his actual garb, the clothing of the man. He has, I think there's like some sort of a black tie, and it's actually, that's the style that the early circuit riding preachers and some of the Presbyterian and sort of evangelical Methodist preachers would use. That was how they would be dressed for Sunday morning worship. So he looks like a pastor or a priest. He is pulling the strings behind the veil, behind the curtain. Even the idea of behind the veil, right? That's a biblical concept, right? The Holy of Holies, which is separated by the veil. And then when they become illuminated, when they realize what's really going on, he then grants their request. And one of the requests that he grants is for the degree. If I'm not mistaken, it's for the straw, oh goodness, Scarecrow. Thank you, the Scarecrow character, and it's a master's of thinkology, because originally in the university it was a master's of theology. And so the theology degree then gets replaced with thinkology, sort of in this struggle between the church and the universities. The church, which operates more through dogma, generally speaking, in comparison, right? Again, this is generalities. But the church, which has more of a dogmatic approach, as opposed to the university, which is more open and, has more of a liberal, hey, we're going to entertain ideas that the church would otherwise say don't even go there. And that kind of comes off then putting all those pieces together as kind of as a critique, or even some would say, as Aaron said, an attack on organized religion in general. And so that theme permeates through the story. When they first get to Oz, they come to the door, and there's a sign that says, don't, I think it's don't ring the doorbell, or maybe it's don't knock. But when they're first introduced to the character, and it's actually it's the man behind the curtain who's portraying the doorman. And after engaging with him a little bit, right, he gets upset with them because they do ring the bell or whatever they're not supposed to do to get his attention. He then tells them later, well, you're supposed to actually knock, but the sign isn't there to explain any of that. And that's also a picture of how the problem in religion and organized religion is there are all these rules that nobody knows, and they end up making the mistake of, erring in church. You go into church and you don't know, oh, hey, I'm not supposed to wear a hat or say this or speak out or whatever. And then the person gets chastised without having any idea what the thing is even about.
Right.
And so it creates, there it is. And so those are collectively within the story, those are critiques of, even if this is true, even if there is a God, it would seem from the perspective of people who are on the outside that there's a misrepresentation, or there's a wrong message being conveyed, right? That it's confusing, and it's not gracious, it's not loving, it's not the things that the church would claim to be. The major, I would say the major concern about in terms of the negative side with Wizard of Oz comes though at the end, because the man in the mirror gets ready to leave, and he's going to take Dorothy with him. And you have four major characters who are, so Dorothy, you've got the lion, you've got the Tin Man, and you have the Scarecrow, who are all there to watch the man behind the curtain ascend into heaven. And this seems to parallel the ascension of Christ with the four gospel writers, the four major gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. As a caveat, not all of them were actually disciples in the explicit sense. Mark and Luke actually weren't. But it's that concept of the four, like the inner circle, right? So certainly Peter, James, and John, that idea of the circle of the disciples. And he's ascending, but he's going back home is like what's really going on, okay? And he conveys to the crowd that he's going to return. But the four, which are the group that's illuminated, know that that's not going to happen. So that then becomes a critique of even the story within the New Testament, this idea, okay, well, Jesus said he was going to come back, but really it was, so it becomes a very sort of, a very critical picture, right? It's not really Jesus, or Jesus isn't really who he claims to be. He's really just the wizard, the sorcerer who does a lot of magic, hides behind the curtain, tells people, hey, I'm going to do this, but then that turns out to not be true, or it's not completely true. And all of this leads to, again, it's a critique, but it's a deep questioning of sort of religious zealotry, the authority of the church. Are these things true? And if they are true, why is there inconsistency? Why are there problems? And so it does in the full sort of embodiment. Maybe not that it was intended per se. I don't know if it was intended purely as an antagonistic narrative, but it certainly can be seen or read that way. And I think the benefit, first and foremost, is kind of like some of the other films we're going to talk about, is to recognize that some of those themes are, again, whether they're intended in an antagonistic or simply a questioning sense, they are implicitly woven into the story to sort of create a picture that causes or provokes the audience to think through what's really being said here, what's really being conveyed by all this, very comical, very theatrical imagery of, a man pretending to be a wizard, talking to a lion and a tin man and scarecrow person.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah.
I think that's interesting that that's one of the most famous films of all time. And yet,
Yeah.
if you really think about it, there's this hidden message there. And
Yeah.
I should have put this disclaimer at the beginning. We're talking about some of the themes that movies have. We don't believe these themes ourselves. We're just telling you what the movies seem to be conveying.
Yeah, right.
We are, the three of us are all,
with that completely.
the three of us are all believers and
Yes.
very much believe in the Bible. So, Tripping Orc is in our crowd. Hello, Tripping Orc. Welcome. Let's see. So I guess let's jump to Rocky.
Okay.
We'll talk about Rocky.
This one, he sent me the thumbnail of Rocky, and I'm like, oh, this is one of the ones we're talking about. That like there's something here. So I'm fascinated by this one. I have no idea where you're going to take us.
Okay. Rocky's awesome. I can't claim total credit for this. The first time I actually heard this, there was a Bible teacher who's passed away by the name of Rob Skiba. And he had channels talking about all kinds of interesting, weird, sort of like left field things pertaining to like giants and Nephilim. So I was interested for like other reasons listening to his content, but he made the connection, and I've since looked into it myself, and really it was fascinating to read about and think about in this light. But the story of Rocky, at least the first two films explicitly, mirrors the life and story of Jesus. So we think about the opening scene, the first scene that we see. The film opens with the credits, and it's the boxing match. It's taking place in an old, worn-out church, and there's the picture of Christ with the Eucharist on the wall, and then the word resurrection. And the camera pans down from Jesus onto Rocky and Spider Rico, who are in the midst of fighting each other. And of course, Rocky wins the match, but they're calling him a bum, and they're throwing paper at into the ring, and they're all this stuff, right? Cursing him. And so Rocky's title throughout the film is The Rock. Okay. So he's a blue collar. I'm building my case. I'm not.
No. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, check one. I never noticed that.
Yeah. So it's called The Rock. He's a sort of a down and out, just a blue collar, normal guy, right? Working, has no form or comeliness, no beauty that we would desire him, right? Just a normal, regular dude. And he is offered the opportunity to fight the heavyweight champion of the world, whose name is Apollo Creed. Jesus is known as the Son of God. Apollo is the sun god, S-U-N, in Greek mythology. And a creed is an ideology that is held by a group or a culture. So we could say Apollo Creed in this sense functions as the god of this world or the god of this age. And so he offers the opportunity to Rocky to fight him. Rocky, in the midst of being challenged by the god of this world, is also pursuing marriage with Adrian. First, dating her, and then ultimately wants to marry her. And one of their dates is he takes her to the ice skating rink where he and his bride, his future bride, walk on water together.
Okay.
He,
I'm with you.
Yeah. So he then, after being given the opportunity to do the fight, he has a Garden of Gethsemane moment where he goes home and talks to Adrian and tells her, I'm not actually going to come out of this okay. I'm going to get beaten, but I'm going to do it nonetheless. I'm going to fight against him. I'm going to try to get through this and go the distance, last all 15 rounds. So he goes to the fight. Before he gets to the fight, he goes and checks out the rink for the stadium for the show. And he sees that there's a big picture of him and Apollo, one against the other. And he's talking about his shorts, which of course his colors are red and white, which Christ is usually depicted with a white robe and a red sash. And he's wearing these shorts, but he tells the fight guy, the coordinator, the person that's putting together the fight, the one who introduces him to Apollo, he says, "Hey, my picture is wrong. You have a wrong image of me. You have a wrong, false representation of who I am." And of course he laughs and he's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's all going to be over tomorrow night anyway." So you have, Rocky is, again, he's the down and out, the blue collar, the everyman, the son of man, who is fighting the god of this world. And even the way he's being represented to the masses is incorrect. He ends up fighting Apollo and beaten horrendously, right? Eyes bulging, right? Blood everywhere, going through the crucifixion, going through the suffering. And at the end of the fight, when he finally he's able to defeat, or he's able to last all 15 rounds, he's on the platform, raised above everyone in the air, and he calls to his bride. He calls to Adrian.
Yo, Adrian, I did it.
And yo, Adrian. And she joins him in the air above everyone else. Then, after they join together in the second film, they elope and get married. Then Rocky comes back to fight Apollo Creed the second time, and this time becomes the champion of the world.
So we have the marriage of church and
the marriage of the church with Christ,
and the second coming.
The second coming, and the defeating of Satan and the Antichrist, and him being established as king of the world.
What are your thoughts, Caleb?
I'm trying. It's a lot. I'm trying to process it because, it's especially bringing Rocky 2 into it. Because whenever I watch Rocky 2, I see Apollo as a protagonist as well.
No, correct, right? No, yeah. This and that's part of the because the archetype is based purely off of like it's the grammar and the nuance, right? It's not a tick for tack that he's clearly the bad guy, right? He is a protagonist, and he's a protagonist because obviously by the second film, I don't know all the writing structure that took place for Stallone over this, but I know that he was setting that up for 3. They become friends. He ends up helping him fight Clubber Lang, right? There's another narrative going on. But the reason it hit me was because when I compared the first 2 films, I realized that the narrative for Rocky 1, according to Sly's testimony, it took him 3 days to write that whole script. So I know that a lot of these things were happening, not necessarily because he had a lot of time to think about, okay, this is my choice for this scene or that scene. It was just sort of rapid fire from his mind. And obviously 3 days, that's significant for us as Christians. That's intriguing that it took 3 days for the script to be written. But then going back and looking at all these little details throughout the story, the walking, quote unquote, walking on water with Adrian, the Gethsemane moment, the fact that he he's the humble fighter, right? He's the warrior, but he's not proud. He doesn't seek a fight with Apollo out of anger or vengeance or any of that. It's just he accepts the challenge. And thinking through the imagery and the narrative from a perspective of the Gospels being told also in a narrative form, and looking at the fact that certain titles are given. So like in Gospel of Mark, Jesus' title is the Son of Man explicitly. In John, he is the Word, he is the Logos. And so there's a really powerful, I think a powerful thing to say in terms of like the ether of inspiration, where people draw on experiences. Sly, of course, has been exposed to Catholicism and exposed to Christianity in that vein. And he's never come out and said explicitly that that's what it was that he was trying to convey at all. In fact, in most of the interviews I've watched, it's mainly just the idea of the everyman, the struggling man. It's an overcoming story. It's a great story in and of itself. But it was really fascinating to watch, and then to ask the question as a believer, if we believe, as we do, that God being creator has, in a sense, put his imprint on everything, is it really possible for us to create a story that is totally devoid of that influence, that is devoid of influence from God? I think within rhetoric, they talk about there being like 7 main archetypes for storylines. Mm-hmm. Like 7 main different categories for stories. So you have like tragedy, and you have romance, and you have an epic, horror, right? Kind of the main genres, right, that we sort of divide film and story into. And what's really fascinating is that even though Rocky has sort of a very clear main theme, this overcoming, hero story, is that you still have all that imagery, somewhat, whether in implicit or explicit, all the way dotted through, right? From, again, the very first picture is Jesus with the Eucharist. And even the idea of that scene, right? The camera panning from that picture, from Christ's face onto Rocky, and the word resurrection there splattered on the screen. And then you see him, sort of, walking through life, being questioned and challenged by even his fellows, right? Those who, they don't really believe in him. They're not sure whether he really is the hero, whether he's actually going to save the day and make things better for any of them. But Rocky strives forward anyway, and then pursuing his wife, pursuing Adrian, all of that in the backdrop, again, of this very powerful sort of, I'm trying to think of the words here, that Apollo's world is defined by everything that Rocky's isn't, right? Affluence, fame, recognition. He's the man's man, right? He's the top of the food chain. He's the most powerful guy. And out of necessity, out of a situation that in the story, right, that his fight, the guy backs out. He then goes looking for, the Italian stallion, and then finds Rocky, and lays this challenge before him. It's just, but to me, seeing all that with the archetypes and the names and the backdrop, right? Apollo versus the Rock, right? The sun god, the sun god versus the son god, son of God. Those things are really provocative to me. And if nothing else, it's fun to think about and reflect on. Mm-hmm. Definitely worth sharing at a party. So,
and let me throw this out there before we get comments. Yes, I know Rocky is loosely based on true events, where a guy got to go the distance with Muhammad Ali.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, we know that.
That was the original inspiration. And I would say, even to sort of piggy ducktail on that, I do think that there are a lot of things in life that happen. It's not that everything is inherently right, Christological or mm-hmm. biblical based or centered, but it's the fact that even the idea of the hero's journey, right? The person, the warrior who fights and dies and overcomes and rises again, that even in that sort of short, maybe 4 or 5 major point story, that relates in a very, very clear, very strong way to the way in which the story of Christ is portrayed in the Gospels. And Jesus's life is written in such a way that we are to get sort of an impression, right, of the hero's journey, overcoming going to the cross, suffering and dying, and then victory, rising again, right, in a spectacular way that creates a punch at the end of the story. And obviously, as believers, we process that differently. It's not the same as going to a major blockbuster and getting popcorn and you're just there to be entertained. But I think it's significant that God puts it in that structure, that the Gospels are relayed in a way that it is both meant to be viewed as history, as truth, but also that it was chosen, that the Spirit chose to convey it in a narrative form, a way that we relate to things in story form. So
that's. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to segue to the next one, but go ahead if you had a comment on Rocky.
That's one thing that I always think is weird about when I've heard people say that, like, oh, I mean, like the Bible, it's too much like a storybook. It's too like, I don't know, like when you open up a history book, it's not necessarily told in a narrative as the Bible is. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's as if that's how we understand better. Because, like, you know, what, honestly, history is something that I always struggle with. If it was in a narrative sense, I might have done better.
Yeah, right. No, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, go ahead and segue. I think I know which one you're going to segue to, because he mentioned horror films. Is that the next one?
We could go there in a minute.
Okay.
One that popped in my head that's not on our list, but the director has said it's based on Christ, and it's shocking when you hear it, is RoboCop. RoboCop, there is a scene where he gets shot in the hand, so like that's the piercing of his hand. There's a scene where he is walking through a puddle and it's a reflection like he's walking on water, and you have the death and resurrection of your main character. So what's his name? Verhoeven?
Paul Verhoeven.
He has come out and said that recently, that yes, RoboCop is based, is the Christ archetype.
What's Starship Troopers?
So, I mean, sometimes, we don't know if Stallone was intentional, but he come out and said, yeah, it was intentional that RoboCop is supposed to be a Christ figure. And it's interesting. You don't think of that, but it was his intention. So let me bring up one that I had on my list. In the 70s, it was a trope to do disaster films. Like right now, the trope is superhero films. Well, in the 70s, they do like the Raising Inferno or whatever, like the Tower on Fire. Who's going to survive? And they'd have these big casts of all these major stars at the time, and you didn't know who was going to live or die, and that was just the formula back then.
Yeah.
So one of those was the Poseidon Adventure. So I don't know, Caleb, have you seen Poseidon Adventure?
No.
I
think they came out with a remake.
There's a remake. I'm talking about the original, from the 70s or whatever. Daniel, have you seen it?
I haven't seen either one.
Sorry, Aaron, the original or the remake?
The original.
The original, yeah, with Gene Hackman.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've got a copy here somewhere at the house.
Yeah. It's it's cheesy, but it's pretty impressive for what they did back then.
Right.
Basically, it's a big cruise liner, if I recall. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it gets hit by a tidal wave, and at midnight on New Year's Eve, it flips over upside down. So everybody's trapped inside the ship, and it's upside down, and they're like all in like a ballroom when it happens. And one of the characters is Gene Hackman, is a priest.
Yes.
And there's this giant Christmas tree in the room, and it has fallen. And at the top of the Christmas tree is Gene Hackman, and he's telling everybody, "Come with me if you want to live." And they're like, "Oh," the captain's like, "No, stay here. Don't worry don't listen to him." And he's telling them, "Come." So a group of them climb the Christmas tree. So you have the Christ imagery there, going up the tree, Christmas tree, and they're following the man of God to be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's very much like Noah's Ark of them closing the door and everybody drowning that's in that room. The water comes rushing in and kills everybody that's still staying in that room because the ship is sinking. And so then the rest of the film is, one by one they start dying off, the people that are following Gene Hackman.
Mhm.
But along the way, they pass another group going the other direction. And he's like, no, you're going the wrong way. This is the way of salvation or whatever. And they don't listen. You never see that group of people again. So it's assumed that they died. So it's almost like they're following a false religion.
Mm-hmm.
And then what gets even crazier at the end, I don't remember why, there's some wheel they have to turn off the flames. And the wheel is like red hot and there's flames below it. And Gene Hackman jumps out to he's the priest and he's turning the wheel and he curses God. And as he curses God, he dies and falls into the fire.
Yeah.
And, that is a term you see a lot in the Bible. Well, Job's wife, why don't you just curse God and die?
Right.
And here you have it literally
Right.
happening. He curses God and he dies and falls into the fire. So, I mean, that one I think is pretty blatant in its imagery that, yes, there are biblical themes going on in this film.
Right.
Poseidon Adventure, Caleb, if you haven't seen it, you gotta check it out.
It sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got Ernest Borgnine.
You could say that.
Or
yeah.
the grandpa from Willy Wonka. It's got everybody in it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Ernest Borgnine, that's Mermaid Man.
Yeah, it's got Mermaid Man in it. Yes.
Evil.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
I
had pictures to show while I was talking about this, but oh well, I forgot. Oh well.
I always assumed that the Poseidon Adventure, like just by the name, I thought it was like a little bit more upbeat than what you just described.
Oh no.
But
it's not. Well, it's funny you say that, Caleb, because I would say, without knowing about the whole disaster film genre, at the very beginning of the film, there's kind of a thought that, they're going to get out, right? They're going to, and are we doing spoilers?
Yeah.
Okay. If you haven't seen the 1960, whenever it came out by this point, and I think the remake was 2006. So that's 15 plus years.
And the 2006 one doesn't have all the religious imagery like the original.
No, right, correct. Yeah, it's the original with Gene Hackman that has the explicitly Catholic or Judeo-Christian imagery. But in the film, you get an impression, at least in the beginning, I think everybody's going to be okay. I don't think, some people are going to get lost. Obviously, the people who stayed in the room, those people drowned. But the core group seems to be safe. But then as time goes on, more and more characters start to drop, right? The group gets smaller, as like in horror case films, right? Like kind of like, Saw or something, right? More and more people drop and just getting smaller. And then when you finally get to the very end with Hackman's character, he's sort of been going through kind of, it's like there's like a crisis of faith. Like I think there's a scene at the very beginning of the film where he's talking with a fellow priest who's on this cruise, and they are discussing theology. They're discussing God, and Hackman's character has a really, I'm trying to think how I say, just that his maybe not deconstructed, but he's viewing things from a different lens, probably a lens that probably people who are more liberal or more secular, or maybe people who don't even believe, would be more open to than someone who's more identified with dogma, right? And staunch, like this is what we believe, and we don't differ from it.
Wikipedia said he's on the outs with the church.
Yeah. So he's in this sort of transition where he's having a crisis of faith. He's questioning what he thinks, what he believes, but he hasn't given up the collar. He hasn't stopped being a priest yet. So it's kind of like that weird, that in between. And he goes through a number of experiences, like with the group that they run into halfway up the boat, trying to get to the hull to cut out. And he's yelling and screaming, "You're going the wrong way, dang you! You're gonna die because you're not listening to me." And you can see in the story him living out and taking on the persona of the hellfire and brimstone preacher, which he's already made the decision at the beginning. He's no longer in that sort of approach or vein of belief, and yet for the sake of getting these people to listen, he sort of reverts back to, like an orthodox, we could say, like, again, using this loosely, sort of an orthodox Christian or a sound doctrinal approach to this is the truth. There's no other way. That's kind of that's what's being conveyed. And then at the very end of the film, when he actually dies, it's like a brief conversation with God where he's angry and he feels, or he conveys from what he's saying, that God it's bad enough the ship is turned over, which he doesn't blame God for, but it's almost as if every time they run into a problem, it's like God is opposing them in trying to get out. And so like his language is, he says, I'm not asking you to save us, but don't fight against us. Like that's basically the gist of what he's communicating. And then he turns the wheel, he gets rid of it's like a pipe valve with like this hot gas or pressure, fire, whatever's coming out. He turns the valve, but he's lost all the strength in his body, and he drops into the fire below and dies. The rest of the group does actually get out. There's a rescue team that like gets to the hull, and they're cutting a hole through the metal, and the rest of the group gets out. So it's not a completely negative downer ending. Like you have sort of that catharsis of some people escaping, but in sort of the full evaluation, sort of along the lines similarly to Oz, the Wizard of Oz, it's once again a questioning of theology. It's a questioning of the rightness of the church, because here you got this guy who's a priest. He's meant to be the symbol of the guy who's with God or knows about God, and the rest of the culture doesn't. But he himself is questioning, and in the end, he's not saved in the physical sense, right? He isn't. His body isn't. He's not able to escape. So it's that questioning and that doubting as a critique.
But even with his sacrifice, though, the others are saved through his sacrifice.
Right.
So there's that also.
Right. Yeah.
Happening.
And that's why I say it's not. I don't think in any of these films, maybe some more than others, but like in the case of Poseidon Adventure, it's the questioning of both sides. It's a recognition that, hey, there is something good intrinsically about truth, right? Being exclusive, like this is the way out. Sacrifice for the sake of others, which of course is the Christological theme. Christ laying down his life for his friends. No man has greater love than this, right? Than that a man lay down his life for his friends. You see those things present, but they're present along with the struggle and the outward expression of doubt through the main character and through the other characters as well. So it's kind of a, again, I guess the only word that keeps coming is critique, just that it would cause the audience to question and think about it. So, but yeah, all in all, it's a good film. So
yeah. Caleb mentioned horror films. So these aren't like directly Bible related, but they do borrow from Jewish history and some other things.
Yeah.
So I think you said Friday the 13th and Halloween both borrow from some things.
Yes. So yeah.
Yeah.
I
haven't heard this one, but I've heard him talk about this one.
Okay. So we'll start with the one I think that's maybe the connection's a lot less obvious. So Friday the 13th with Jason, correct?
Yes, Jason.
Well, the first one,
Pamela Voorhees.
Yes, the original, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the story is that Jason is murdered, right, on the water, on the river, put to death, and Jason then resurrects as sort of this, monster that comes to attack and kill others, like in sort of a vendetta or vengeance thing against the ones who are there, who are unlucky enough to be camping nearby, where his spirit lies. There's imagery it's gonna cross over to the Michael Myers character here in a second when we go to that. But the basic gist is that you have a supernatural character who is taking vengeance on those who are living by the riverside where the atrocity, the murder of Jason took place. That imagery is very similar to the story that takes place in the Exodus, where the baby boys are drowned in the Nile. And then it is a supernatural figure, the angel of death, who comes back to bring vengeance on the people, the Egyptians. The reason that is a tie-in to Exodus, seemingly, is actually because of the title Friday the 13th. Because in the Hebrew calendar, the Exodus, the Passover itself, the death angel night of the 10th plague of Egypt, happened on the month of Nisan, the 14th. But Passover, the Sabbath, starts at sundown. So from the perspective of the Egyptians, the angel of death showed up on Friday the 13th. So you have this somewhat bizarre thing
Yeah.
that in history that justifies this idea of, yeah, that's when the monster shows up, is on Friday the 13th to kill everybody.
Yeah.
Um,
and horror films in general, there is, at least decent horror films, there's an underlying theme of, if you're a sinner, if you're sleeping around, you
Right,
will
yeah.
pay for your sins.
right, correct, yeah.
There are certain rules
Yes.
in order to survive a horror movie.
Yes, you have to be the virgin guy or what? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but
It's the sin
that-
factor.
yes, that's right. So that theme continues over to Halloween. So Michael Myers is actually a Hebrew name. Michael, which is an angel, Michael, and then Maer, which means of light or from light. So the angel of light, who comes to kill the sinners, to judge them for being disobedient before God. So you see, so this pattern between both Jason and Michael of being this supernatural judgment of God that comes to, bring God's wrath. That seems to be, at least from the naming of Michael, the Friday the 13th, that is implicit at some level. So on the part of the writers.
So the actor who played Shrek is
Yes.
Yeah,
Shrek is an angel of light.
Is an angel of light, right? Yeah.
Or Austin Powers is an angel
Austin,
of light.
Austin Powers,
the love guru.
is the angel of light. That's right, baby. So yeah.
Wow, that's so. Of these, if you've already talked about it, because it might be one of the previous ones. Of the things that you can make these connections with. What's your favorite one that you've made? That like favorite connection that you've made? Like, is it the Rocky one, or is it like something we haven't talked about?
That's a tough one. There's one that I wanted to talk about anyway, just because, because the imagery is so intriguing. But it's the first film that I ever watched as a kid that I remember, and I did the evaluation. I looked back at it later, much later in life. I hadn't even stopped to do what we're doing here, but it's Jurassic Park.
Okay.
And near as I can tell, Jurassic Park is the Genesis creation narrative story of Adam and Eve. So at the very beginning of the film, this one's fun because there's a lot of imagery. So at the very beginning of the film, Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler meet John Hammond, and they are clothed in gender-specific colors, pink and blue, that we use for baby reveals, for gender reveals for children. They meet John Hammond, who is the bearded man in the sky who comes down from his helicopter. And he meets them in the dust of the earth,
and
where they are digging for a velociraptor.
Yeah,
which
and John.
Go ahead.
I was going to say he has what is often depicted as God with having a big white bushy beard.
Yeah,
he's got the
stereotypical man in the sky is what John Hammond. He's literally covered in all but white.
Yes,
and he flies down. He descends from heaven in his helicopter. And he meets them in the dust of the earth, right? When the helicopter comes down, they get upset because they're, cover up the bones because it's going to cover the dust. Well, the dust is the title that God says. He says to Adam, "For dust you are, to dust you shall return, for you were taken out of the dust." So there's a connection there to the sort of imagery that we see in Genesis with the creation of man. He then tells Adam and Eve, Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, that he has created a garden. And he wants to bring them to this garden where they can live and be around the things that John Hammond has brought to life. And so they go in his helicopter and they hover over the surface of the waters, like the Spirit of God in Genesis 3 or Genesis 1:3. He takes them to the garden and everything is good. The gates are all up. You see the animals. Everything is as it should be. But there's a serpent in the garden, Dennis Nitron, and the serpent creates problems that causes chaos in the garden. And halfway through the film, there's a conversation between God and Eve, John Hammond and Ellie, where she confesses wrongdoing and guilt over the fact that things are now all wrong, which is the woman confessing her sin to God. Behold, I ate from the tree that I should not have. I didn't understand this power. I didn't have respect for it, and now it's out. And the film ends with God banishing Adam and Eve from the garden, and they leave.
Is there, I'm just processing all this as I'm thinking. We also have Jeff Goldblum, who's all in black. Is there some reason
So
with him?
this falls into what is called a mystical or a Kabbalistic interpretation of the Torah. And so I believe it's my, and by the way, just as a side note, I have a Jewish background myself. So that's also the lens that I'm looking at all this through in terms of my own personal study. Messianic, a Jewish believer in Jesus. And so there are a lot of Old Testament and Jewish themes in films, because you have many guys in the movie making world in Hollywood, like Steven Spielberg, who is Jewish and is probably familiar with some of these understandings or interpretations that he's received, either going to temple or synagogue or talking with, family or friends about ways in which the story is interpreted. Connecting this with specifically what you just talked about with Goldblum, there are two angels. I want to say this is in the Zohar, which is a commentary on the Torah, who their job or what their office, what they do throughout the story of creation is they levy questions against God. Do you have a right to do this? Do you have a right to do that? And it seems to be that's who Goldblum's character and I'm forgetting the lawyer's name. But there's the lawyer, the one who agrees with John, who gets excited and wants to sell, make a ton of money. But basically that's what those two characters, they symbolize, is the angels who are questioning God's right and authority to create things and to do things, and what's going to be the consequence of this as things are going on. And God defends himself, right? John Hammond defends his right to create, and that's the right thing to do. He looks to Adam for Adam's thought and support. Adam ultimately pleads ignorance, right? Because Grant says, 65 million years, how could we possibly know what to expect? He just kind of throws his hands up like, this is all new to me. I have no idea what's going on. I wasn't expecting to show up at an island and see a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So there's that. And so it's this deep dive, going back to the critique thing, the question that is raised: what were the consequences of creation? Was it really good? Was it right for God to go through this process? What were the positives, if there were any? What were the negatives? And just kind of like a thought-provoking evaluation, again, from a mystical, not an Orthodox interpretation of Torah like the Orthodox Jewish community would, but from a more mystical or Kabbalistic interpretation of just questioning the story. But the imagery to me it's just clear as day. Again, from the gender-specific clothing to the two, right, the male and the female, which are brought to the garden, to John Hammond's outfit. I mean, certainly the bearded white man in the sky. All of that together, and again, the hovering over the face of the waters. There's so many little things, I think, with little small details all throughout the story that sort of lend themselves to verses or references that we see in the Genesis narrative. And I found it intriguing to me as a kid that providentially that was one of the first films, or the first film that I remember ever watching or seeing. And if it was in fact sort of a evaluation of the Genesis story, that the first film I ever watched was connected with the first book of the Bible, the start of God's story. Is here is the issue in the story so far. But yeah, I have a number of these, but I don't know if I have a favorite. I really enjoyed that one because it was really powerful years later.
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, definitely.
analyzing it, and thinking through that. I'd have to get back on you whether it's a favorite, but yeah, go ahead.
Tripping Orc just said Jurassic Park's messaging was a lot more subtle than Chronicles of Narnia. I never picked up on any of this. I'm right there with you.
I
Yeah.
think Spielberg is kind of a filmmaking genius. I saw the
Me
outfits
too.
growing up more as perfect action figures. Like you could just
Yeah,
they all
right. We
had
got to
color
make money. We
schemes.
sell.
They all had perfect color
Franchise,
schemes. You knew
yeah.
exactly who everybody was just by the colors.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. And I don't know how much. I don't know how much of Spielberg was involved with Prince of Egypt. I know it was DreamWorks, so I mean, I'm sure he's well aware of all of these things with his Jewish background. So
yeah,
I also want to point out the fact that we're implying that Newman is Satan.
Of course he is.
Doesn't that fit so good with
it's so good.
It's just like, it's just the cream on the top.
It's so
cherry on the ice cream. Yeah.
Okay. So like, if you if you don't have an exact number, obviously not, but like, how many of these have like you have you like actually sat down and was like, I'm gonna find what's going on in jeez.
Yeah.
That was from Entertainment Weekly, where they depicted Newman as the devil.
Hello, Newman. Yeah.
So how many of these have you how many films have you dissected in this way?
A number of them. I don't have a number off the top of my head. When I was younger, it was it started off really slow. Like it'd be like one film first, and I'd just be thinking about that for like ever. It would just be really just strange to me, interesting, all those thoughts, all those emotions, right? That there's this like layer, right, that exists beneath the front initial point or meaning of a story. And then there came a point where after doing it for a while, it just sort of kind of became a second nature thing. Like I'd go into a film, not for that purpose expressly. Like I enjoy watching films just for fun, but just kind of like in the back of my head, just kind of like taking notice of things like, oh, the main character did this with a right hand instead of a left hand or something like that. Right. And just kind of asking the question and thinking through like, was that was it license on the part of the actor, just kind of did something, or was there something more like, what did the director want that specific action? Was he trying to convey something? And obviously, like when it comes to film theories, right, there's like no end to films on YouTube or on social media about, oh, this is what this film really meant, or this is what that really meant. All kinds of like conspiratorial ideas. But what to me was intriguing was that as I compared films across time in the space of theology, there did seem to be some themes some patterns that were reoccurring, that seemed to like things that continued to sort of come up in terms of like, there's like, you got your general archetypes, like with protagonist, antagonist, right? There's always going to be generally a good guy and a bad guy, a villain and a hero, but even more specific things in terms of the themes that we see in scripture. And so that was something. Walking on water was something that I would see in a lot of places, or in places that I wouldn't.
I'm gonna know to look for it now. Like
ice
skating, stepping in a puddle. I'm gonna
stepping in a puddle, right? Yeah. So things like that just kind of pop up, and you're like, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. So and I think it, in terms of just for me, it's just fun. It's just a fun discipline, something that I enjoy thinking about films in this way, and I think that it's beneficial, and it's also a good way to pass time. But
I'm sure it's.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was supposed to say I'm sure it's more fun. The more subtle it is, like
I can't
imagine it's fun to dissect The Matrix or Man of Steel because of how in your face those are.
100%. Yeah.
Man of Steel got ridiculous. I got annoyed with Man of Steel. It's like, I'm 33 years old. And like, yeah, we get it. You're
We
Jesus.
understand. We get it. We're on the same page. Yeah, no, the more subtle, you're absolutely right, Caleb. The more subtle it is, more fun. And that's the point at which it becomes it's not like you get into like fights or arguments bickering about, what was, the dragon's nose in the never ending story. It looked like some little, but it's fun to bat those things around with friends. To where you'll say, did you see this, or did that hit you the same way? Were you, did you get an impression? Because I got this impression, or I got whatever. And so,
we could be 100% wrong on these too. It could be like you ask the director, he's like, "What are you talking about? I never thought that."
And that's happened before. It's at the bare minimum with people who like you'll see film theories. I think who was it recently? Key and Peele. Oh goodness, I'm trying to think of his full name.
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele, thank you. So he did a review of some of his films, Get Out, and then the like alien horror, Nope, where he was like dispelling some theories about some things, but he was intrigued by them. He was like, "Wow, that makes sense what you're saying," and I didn't. It wasn't what I wanted, but that's interesting that fits. So it's fun for nothing else, just the discipline of like just thinking about it, talking about it. But yeah, a number of films. That was something like one of the things when I watched Marvel with Thanos. Thanos' character walks on water at the end of Infinity War.
Yeah,
which is a fun when he's having his vision of Gamora, and he walks to her on water. So that's one of those things you see it, and you're just kind of thinking through in terms of trying to evaluate purpose, meaning why they chose that specific image. Does it convey something? Does it not convey something? Just fun things to think about. So
we'll do one or two more, then we'll wrap up. Like we said, it's Super Bowl Sunday, and we will probably do this again in a few months. Maybe we'll do comic books and biblical themes or something like that.
Okay.
Man of Steel.
Yeah. We'll talk about Man of Steel.
What biblical theme could be there? Yeah.
I'll bring up one quick one, and then Daniel can finish us out with one.
Okay.
So I was going to talk about my favorite Pixar film, WALL-E.
Inside Out. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's not Inside Out. WALL-E.
WALL-E. Yeah.
WALL-E is the last robot on the Earth. He's very much an Adam character. And then Eve arrives, which is very on the nose. Eve, that this is the first woman that he is seeing. But Eve also represents another thing. Eve represents the dove from the ark. If you just look at her design, she is clearly a dove. And what she is looking for is proof that plants exist on the planet, so that she can go back to the ark to tell them that it is safe to come off the ark. So the whole plot of the film is her finding a living plant to take back to the ark. So it's very much the dove returning to the boat to let them know it's okay for them to come off the boat. The other thing is WALL-E is a very much a innocent character. He's almost a Christ character, and he even goes through a death and resurrection at the end of the film. He is crushed, and he is dying, and you see the spark of life kind of pass between Eve and him to bring him back at the end. Almost like a fairy tale where she's kissing him to bring him out of it. But there's definitely Christian imagery here with WALL-E and Christ. And then when the humans come off the boat at the end, they are very much like babies coming off of the ark, and it's almost like when you become a Christian, you're a new babe in Christ, and you had this imagery of them as babies starting their new life. Just there's tons of imagery in Wall-E. It's all over the place, and the director has said yes, he did look into his Catholic background and put a lot of that into the film. So it is all over the place in Wall-E.
Well, now that you mentioned that, that's Andrew Stanton. Apparently, he's got a lot of hands, or his hands are in a lot of Pixar movies. Like he also did Finding Nemo. There's got to be more or something there. I don't know.
Yeah, but Wall-E, it's clearly there. It's
no. Yours is very overt. Absolutely.
Especially the dove and the twig and returning it to the boat and everything. It is definitely.
Yeah, the arc imagery is unquestionable.
Yes.
That's space arc, but it's an arc nonetheless.
Yeah. So I always like that one. Wall-E is by far my favorite Pixar film. It's just great. You got another one, Daniel, to close us out?
I do. This is actually one of my favorites. This I don't know if it's the favorite, but it's one of my favorites. So
Okay.
Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, okay.
So I will put a little disclaimer out there. I have not seen this film.
How dare you?
I know. You it's okay if you spoil it though. I think I've been spoiled on this through pop culture. It's hard not to be. It's kind of everywhere. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to spoil it because I want.
Yeah, it's fine. Go ahead.
So, the story of Andy Dufresne is the story of Jesus. It's the story of Christ. So we see that he is falsely accused of murder. He is sentenced on the basis of that false accusation. He shows up to the jail, the world in which he occupies for the majority of the film. And the first day he has an interaction with the warden, who is the prince of that world, the enemy, Satan in effect, who opposes him throughout the entire story. And the warden is using the word of God to justify what he's doing to the inmates and his evil that he's doing. Andy brings together a group of disciples who begin to follow him and listen to him. They realize that he has a gift, which is that, obviously that he's very well educated and worked in finance and bank and all these things. But he uses that influence to be able to help them and teach them, and even to give them drink so that they can have enjoyment and life, which they have on top of the roof after they get done spackling or whatever it is they're doing, and they all get to drink beer. One of his disciples, unfortunately, takes his life by hanging, which is what happens in the Gospels with Judas. And the story of Dufresne ends with the warden discovering that his tomb, his hole that he carved out, is empty. And he is not there. He is risen. And the warden ends up getting his just deserts in judgment, and he is exposed as a criminal himself. And then he takes his life. So the whole way through the story, you see these little pieces indicating that Andy that he is the hero, the Christological archetype, who ends up not only providing salvation, gaining salvation himself by being able to resurrect right through the cave the little hole that he carves out for him to escape, but then also that Red ends up getting freed as well and joins him on a beach where he's building a boat. I don't remember specifically if it is in fact a fishing boat, but I think that it may be that he's rebuilding, and provides through this letter that he writes to his disciple the means by which to get back to him and reunite, and they're together in this heaven, heaven on earth picture at the end of the story. So I kind of ran through the imagery, but yeah, Shawshank is
no, I definitely see that.
Yeah.
Another one, and I could talk about this one for a long time. Actually, two of them, two more Pixar films.
Okay.
Up very much
Yeah.
has themes about purgatory and
Yeah.
heaven and all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And then Toy Story 3, there's
course.
imagery of heaven and hell all over the place in that film.
Definitely
Starts
hell.
with,
That
well,
imagery was
it starts with the image of clouds because they're in heaven. They're at Andy's house, and at the end of the film, they're back in heaven now with, I think her name is Molly or whatever. It focuses on the clouds again. So there's like this. It's almost like what is that called? Not Paradise Lost. The one where the guy's going through the journey. Dante's Inferno.
Dante's Inferno. Yeah.
It's almost like a Dante's Inferno
Yeah.
Plot involving the Toy Story characters.
The house that Andy built.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is clearly there. It starts on the clouds, they go through the flames, they're back in the clouds. It's all over the place. So
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
all familiar with the YouTuber Jenny Nicholson, who
I
does
am
a
not.
lot? Oh, okay.
Maybe. Let's
She
see.
does a lot of stuff on like Disney, Star Wars, theme park attractions. She's really into theme parks. She did a video on this one church that does they for every year for Easter they
Okay.
parody
I have seen
parody.
these videos, yes.
Oh,
Where they parody a movie and they like do it to the Easter story.
yeah.
Okay.
So you've
Okay.
seen these?
Is it?
They are bizarre.
Yeah.
Let's see. It's just at Jenny Nicholson.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm looking at her stuff.
Yeah, but she's
Yeah. She's got the Iron Man cross.
Yeah,
Video where they do the Avengers for the resurrection and Iron Man gets crucified. Yeah.
Those are strange, but yes.
Yeah.
Those...
Well, and so you bringing up Toy Story 3 that made me think of their I think they called it Joy Story or something.
Oh, really? There's a like a little skit. The Gospel According to Disney, I think, is what it's called. And it's like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 minutes long, maybe not even that long. And it's the music from a number of Disney films with just sort of like amalgamated together. And the language is placed and slightly altered in a sense to kind of create from the creation to the cross redemption story. And it's actually not that bad. It's definitely not a professional production. It's churches that are putting it on.
Mhm.
But it's well worth a watch, and it does. Yeah, it starts with the music that you see when this is sort of the old school logo, right? When it dun 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 dun, dun and when the castle would come up, and so it starts off there, and then you have, I don't know if the first music is like the Lion King or something like that, but yeah, it's the creation imagery. God creates the world. Adam and Eve, and a lot of this is mimed, right? A lot of it's like there's not a whole lot of dialogue outside of the music itself.
Mhm.
So God's like pointing to the tree, right? X bad, don't do that. And then Satan's song is "Scars, be prepared," right? He's like, I'm going to be king. Well, I'm going to rule. And goodness, there's a number of really good. Lion King features heavily because there's Lion King.
Oh, of course.
For obvious reasons,
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very good little adaptation. I was actually a part of that at my church.
Okay.
And it's fun. And it's like I said, it's worth a watch. So
it's almost like the reason that Jesus taught in parables is because that's what we, and so like we do that now because like, oh man, people like people like Batman. So, and then if you come in with some insight, I've definitely done it with Star Wars a couple times. In my youth ministry career.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Star Wars, you have very clearly the Emperor at the Return of the Jedi is being cast into a bottomless pit. I mean, it's clear as day that imagery is there. So those are the ones we came up with. We could talk about this topic for hours. And like I said, we'll probably do a follow-up show in a few months. But be sure to post your movie theories down below where you've noticed connections to Christianity, and we would love to read them. Please like and share. And I think next week we're probably gonna do, depending on how good they are, we'll probably do Super Bowl trailers. We'll talk about those, any commercials, and if there's a Nintendo Direct this week, we'll also talk about that. Maybe just get caught up on news. So that's the plan for next week. We thank everybody for joining us, and until next time, I've been Final Monkey.
I'm Caleb.
And I'm Daniel.
And we'll catch you next time in the Shark Pond. See ya.
See ya.